Here we go. All right, here's the link in the chat. Andrew Schultz, dude, fucking dude's a legend. Like,
Yeah.
he used to do Brilliant Idiots. I think I did one episode of Brilliant Idiots at the studio. Dude, yeah, he's great. He's awesome. YouTube link in the chat. Make sure you mute yourself here on Zoom, and I'll see you guys on that side. All right. So first things first, just make sure that you can hear me on YouTube, and if you could, just write your name in and say that you can hear me. Let's see, I'm going to test and make sure that you guys can hear what I'm saying, but it would be great. Oh, thanks, Jordan. Let's see, I'm going to test and make sure. Cool, so you guys should be able to hear me. Man, I am compressed as fuck, this fucking microphone. I don't know if it's too loud for you guys, so I can dial it back if you want. But, here we go. Test. Okay, let's jump back in. So this is what we were getting into yesterday, right? Thanks, Charles. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you for letting me know. So this is what we worked on yesterday, this guy. Right? Some weird shit. What I want to start talking about is this idea of warping. Now, you guys already understand this for the most part, right? Because we did Elastic Audio in Pro Tools. And remember, Elastic Audio was a way for you to detach pitch and tempo. Remember that back in the day, if you wanted to change the speed of a song, it would change the pitch as well. So if you sped something up, the pitch would go up. Or if you slowed something down, the pitch would go down. So they were always interlinked or always connected, right? Elastic Audio is a way for you to detach those and increase one without affecting the other. So Ableton does it as well, but it actually does it, in my opinion, a little better than Pro Tools, and it actually does it as the default setting in Ableton. So you guys already know this, but when you are playing a song in Ableton, and then you change the tempo, I'm going to turn this down. And if you change the tempo, it's going to change the tempo of the whole beat. So watch this. Up here on the top left is where you can change the tempo. You just click and drag it up and down. Now, the cool thing is that some of these clips are audio clips, and some of them are MIDI clips. Now, MIDI you already know is going to change based on the tempo. That's the default of MIDI, right? But the fact that the audio tracks do the same is amazing. And the reason they do it as well, by default, is because Ableton automatically detects warp markers for the audio clips that get inputted into the session. So any audio that comes into your session, whether you record it or if it's a sample that you took from somewhere, like that hip-hop loops, no matter where the audio comes from, Ableton automatically analyzes it and creates warp markers. Remember, the warp markers are those little pillars that you use to either stretch audio out and slow it down, or push audio closer and closer together and make it faster, right? So let's take a really quick example of the drums, because that's a really simple way of thinking about it. When you want to create warp markers for a drum kit or any kind of percussive sound, the computer or the DAW will find all the transients of the track, of the drums or of the percussion, and create warp markers at those points. Now, if you look at the clip down below, this is the drum pattern, right? Now, it's so easy to detect the transients because everything in a drum kit is essentially a transient that you can use as a warp marker. Now, if you look above the clip line, you'll see a bunch of these little dots, or they're actually small little lines right above the clips, right? They're a little white. Hopefully you can see that, right? Each one of those indicates a warp marker, or I believe they call it a pseudo warp marker, right? Which is essentially a warp marker that can become, a point that can become a marker to stretch audio. Now, if you want to actually engage the warp marker, all you have to do is hover over this point, any point, and you see that a little tab appears. If you double click that tab, it turns yellow, which we already know in Ableton is the engage button, or is the on button, or on light. And now you have a warp marker here in the middle of the beat. And you can either shift things to the left or to the right. Now remember, when you create one warp marker and move it around, it's going to move everything before and after it, right? Right? So what you want to do if you actually want to change the pattern is you create a warp marker before and after the point that you want to change, right? So you can do that by double clicking them, or if you just hold Command and hover over a warp marker point, you can double click it and it will highlight all three. So I'll do it one more time. Oh, they're not lines, they're triangles. Totally forgot that. So here you go. Hover over this. If you hold Command, the markers before and after become an option to engage. And there you go. So if I wanted to, I could actually move this snare now to something like that. Let's do this. Right? Something weird. Interesting. Interesting. Not too crazy about it, but interesting. But you can do that for like the entirety of the beat, right? You could actually go in and start messing around with the whole pattern if you want to. So if you want to, or if you're even, if you want to go even simpler than that, you see how this snare is technically off the grid a little bit. Remember, this is the top of the beat. If you want to quantize it, you can literally just drag it onto the grid. Thus, it's quantized. Now, the cool thing about Ableton is also that you can quantize your audio tracks. Same way that you did. Select the whole thing and quantize. All right, there you go. Remember, it's quantizing using the warp markers as a pillar to shift the audio onto the grid, right? Oh. All right. Cool, right? So that's basically what you can use warp markers for. You can adjust, you can quantize an audio track like this. You can even start shifting things around and making the beat a little bit more interesting. So if you wanted to, say, do that again, something like this. Right? So I'm not going to go in and do it, but just know that you can do that. So the other thing that you might have noticed is that I kind of killed the whole swing of the beat too, right? Because before it was, but after quantizing it's, so just be careful when you do stuff like this. It's going to change the entire vibe of the beat. So what I'll do is I'll actually copy this down because I like it straight as well. But this guy, here's what I'll do. I'll copy you down, and then I'll quantize you. All right, so that's warping, or that is essentially the introduction to how you can use warp markers. Now, look, this is not just for percussion, obviously. You can do this with vocals too. Right, if you can see that warp markers are present all here. So you can say something like, right? You can change the pattern and percussive nature of whatever audio you want. Maybe we'll do something more interesting. Right? You can change the entire vibe of a song if you wanted to. That's actually pretty cool. So there you go. You can get some interesting vibes going with that. Interesting vibes going with that. Man, I've been spending too much time in the studio saying shit and too much time around you guys as well. Like fire. What was the thing I said yesterday? That shit is dope. So I'm spending too much time with you guys. All right. Let's, oh shit. Look at that. Previous students coming in to check out my class. Bro, why don't you go to your fucking mod, man? Nah, fuck it. Stay. This is the fucking shit. This is the place to be. This mod is the place to be. Specifically, my class is the fucking place to be. Nah, good to see you, man. Good to see you. All right. Do what again, Jordan, specifically? I think you might have been talking about the vocal thing, but I'll show you the vocal thing anyway. So when you have a vocal right here, the vocals originally went like this. But you can see that the warp markers are present for all the vocal syllables. So what that means is if I zoom in to one of these, let's say the first pattern, I can actually change the pattern by adjusting the warp markers. So I'm going to hold Command, double click so that I have space to move the audio without fucking everything up. And then I'm going to move this to here. I'm going to do the same with this. Maybe do this. Or maybe I'll do that. Right? Or do... Maybe I'll do that here too. Come on. That's cool. Right? It's pretty cool. So you can get really creative with that. So that's essentially like an introduction to warp markers and what you can do with it. I'm going to come back every mod. Bro, isn't that... Come on. What more do you want here? If all my students... Okay. Fucking hell. Whatever. Let's not go there. We'll talk about it later on Zoom. And hopefully shit will change by the end of this week. Anyway. So let's go back to some drums, right? Let's say... Now, here's the thing, right? So if you have a drum sound, yeah, let's start with drums. Whenever you try to warp anything, whether it's drums, vocals, guitar, it's going to affect the actual quality in some way. And you've heard this concept already when we did Pro Tools. Because what happens is, if you are stretching out audio or if you're pushing it together, the audio components are like these little blocks, right? So literally, if you picture this as like a block of audio, and then this is like the next block of audio, and another block of audio, and another block. What you're doing when you're slowing shit down or speeding things up is that you're bringing these blocks closer and closer together, right? As you speed things up, you bring the blocks closer together. As you slow shit down, you bring the blocks further and further apart. Now, the thing is, it's not exactly how I showed it right now because the blocks don't actually stretch. It's not the individual blocks that stretch, but rather the space between them stretch, or the space in between them reduces. So if you can imagine them as all these blocks, what happens is when you speed things up, they kind of get closer together. But when you stretch things out, what happens is the blocks eventually reach a point where they disconnect, right? They kind of fall apart. Now, the question is, what happens in between that? That's where you start to get some weird, what's it called? Glitchy kind of vibes, right? Which it can be good. If you're going for that style of music, it can be really, really effective. But it's also why if you're doing like classical music or high fidelity kind of music, it's going to be a real problem. So just to kind of just keep that in your mind as I go into the next part, the idea of like these blocks kind of moving further apart and then there's a gap in between them. Now, when it comes to warping, there are a couple of algorithms that you can follow. Some algorithms work better for drums, some work better for vocals or piano or a full 2-track song like a record, right? If you go to your clip view over here, you see a little thing called beats, right? Underneath where it says warp. If you click on beats, you will see all the algorithms that I am talking about. The beats algorithm is exactly the same as the rhythmic algorithm in Pro Tools. So beats is really a great algorithm to use if you want to speed up or slow down percussion or drums. Tones is better for vocals or bass, right? Or single note lead guitar, right? Whenever there's one pitch at a time, tones is really good. Or monophonic, right? It's the same as monophonic in Pro Tools. Texture is the same as polyphonic in Pro Tools, which means if you have things that have big chords in them, textures is better. Repitch is kind of like the tape thing. So that means if you speed things up, the pitch goes up. If you slow things down, the pitch goes down. Complex and Complex Pro are for when you have 2 tracks, like full-on records, and Ableton has to process the entire record to slow it down or speed it up. So if you wanted to take a sample of some song that you like and bring it into the DAW, I would use Complex or Complex Pro to speed it up and slow it down, right? Because there's like a lot of layers. There's percussion, there's pitch, melody, vocals, right? So let's start with beats. Beats is for drums, and it works great when you speed things up or slow things down. But you hear how that little swell, like whoop, there's like a whoop thing, and that's because of that concept that I mentioned before, where the blocks of audio, as they get further and further apart, actually disconnect, and there's a gap in between them. And it's like Ableton needs to know, well, what do I do in the gap? Should it be silent? Should it be filled up? What do you want? And that's the fucking brilliant thing about Ableton, is that it gives you the option. So right underneath where it says beats, you can actually choose where you want the markers to actually be, right? So right now we're preserving transients, but under that you see these arrows going about. What's making the channels monitor your mic input? I'm using universal audio, so my mic goes straight to you guys. But you see these arrows right here? This is determining what happens in between the actual blocks of audio, or the in between the actual warp blocks. So right now it has a forward and backward arrow, which means if you can kind of visualize it, and I'll show you this later visually when we're back on Zoom, but what happens is if you have 2 blocks, right? If you take like the first 2 blocks of this beat and you stretch out, let's see, I'll do it like this. And you stretch out the audio, and then, oh, okay. Now there's a gap between them, right? My face is like the gap in between those 2 blocks. If you have the double arrow selected, then Ableton is going to say, hey, in between these 2 blocks, I want you to place the sample or the block again forward, then backward, then forward until it reaches the second block. So there's like a forward-backward motion of the original block before it hits the second block, right? So that's what you're hearing. Those are the gaps being filled up when you hear all that whooshing sound. Right? Right? Again, this is for when you slow shit down, because when you speed things up, they just get closer together, so it's not really an issue. But when you slow things down, that's when things start to fall apart. But that's when you can get some creative shit going. The other 2 options are you can either have the block going forward, backward until it reaches the second one, or you can just have it copy forward, or you can just have it completely dead and silent, right? So the forward one sounds like this. A little glitchy, right? And then the stop one sounds like this. Right? You can hear it cut off. It almost sounds like a gate, right? So that's kind of the cool thing about Ableton. Now, the thing that I love about this is that even though beats is something that you would use for drums primarily, you can get super creative with it and use it in other ways, right? So, yeah, like, so for example, if we had a vocal thing, test. Now check this out. So I got vocals here, but I have even though I said that vocals, the tones is better, I can have it set to beats algorithm. And this time I'm going to preserve 16th notes. And that means that the warp markers are going to create 16th note values of vocal blocks. And if I change this to a hard stop, so what that means is as you slow things down, the vocal blocks get further and further apart, and you silence them, you can get like a kind of stutter effect. 30-second notes. Right? It's pretty cool. So yeah, look, you can get super creative with this stuff. It's not like beats is just for this, but you can get very creative with this stuff. So let's go back to the drum thing again. Actually, no. Let's go to vocals. So that's one way of using your beats algorithm for vocals. You can get like a glitchy sound, but again, it has to be when you slow it down. You can't just add it like that. Otherwise, you can do some other. There's another way to do it, which I'll show you when we get into simpler. Because when you sample stuff, it's easier to glitch stuff out. But if you have vocals and you just want to retain the actual quality, then you would go for either a tones, texture, or complex algorithm. If you go to tones, you can see that you have one, what would I say? parameter that you can use called grain size. And the easiest way to understand this is if you can imagine, so in the same way that we had drums and you kind of imagined chopping them up by samples or by blocks, if you have vocals, imagine like the entire vocal clip is made up of grains and grains of salt or sand or whatever, or cocaine, whatever. I don't know what you're into, but imagine that it's just a bunch of different grains of shit. Now the grain size will actually determine how big or small the individual grains are. And the easiest way to kind of, set up this blueprint in your head is like larger values are for when the notes are not as defined. So like 808s and subs and things like that. And lower values are for when they are more defined, like a vocal. So check this out. So if I slow it down. Now, if it's not good enough, you can go with textures, which is essentially a higher version of that. And if that's still not good enough, I go complex. Way cleaner. Now, the only reason why you don't want to go complex all the time is because complex, and especially complex Pro, are very heavy algorithms, right? So they take up a lot of CPU, and you just want to be aware of that. Another cool thing that you can do if you want to just do the pitch shift thing is, so if I think the original tempo we were at like 100 or something. If you change it to repitch, right? So this is like your tape machine. Right? So that's where you want to have pitch changes as the speed changes as well. So if you want speed and pitch to be connected, it's repitch. Otherwise, you want to use any of the other algorithms right up here. Okay? Let's see. Okay. So now that you have somewhat of an idea of warping, and just to be kind of drive it home, let's do it with a piano too. So let's see if we can make this interesting by doing beats, selecting 30-second notes, and doing like a hard stop. Right, you can get super crazy with that. So this BPM is referring to the original BPM of the clip. So you have to factor in the BPM of the original clip, the BPM of the session, which the clip is going to warp to. And then based on that, like I said, you can get very, very creative, like I just did right there. All I did was I shifted it so that the original tempo increases, and then that maps down or warps down to the project tempo. It's really cool stuff. Sorry you guys have to hear this over and over again. I'm actually not a big fan of this thing. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what else you can do with the whole warp marker situation. All right, so for one, let's just go back to drums. So this is a pretty straight beat. Actually, the original one was this. So if you are not the best drummer or whatever in the world, or a percussive guy in the world, maybe you can only make a beat as straightforward as this. And by straightforward, it's not like, I'm not saying this like as a offensive thing. I'm just saying that if you're new to this and you only know how to kick, snare, ta 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 ta, I don't blame you. You got to start somewhere. But Ableton has a cool solution to help you get a little bit more sauce out of your beats. What you do is you go to this little section called grooves. So there's a whole selection of different grooves that you can choose from to make your beat sound a little bit more interesting. So you see things like African shakers, fully quantize, slow rock, swing, right? So maybe we could take something like swing, right? Or something like that. If you double click it, and I'm going to add the 30-second one as well. Swing 16 and swing 32nd. So what this is going to do is, even though they just sound like little dots, it gives like a blueprint or a map of the pattern that we want to map onto our drums. So if our drums is like super straight, like ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, we want to map a swing style onto this. So what you do is you double click the groove to load it into the groove pool. That's what it's called, a groove pool right here. Then you just go to your clip, and right where it says groove, you can click on that, and there's a pull down menu now of 2 different options. Hear that? It's back to that swing. If I take it off, and if I put it back on, 3, 4. Right? So now you can make your beats way more interesting. So what's happening is this clip is being mapped onto this thing, swing 16th. So it's kind of combining them. It's not the right way to say it. The right way to say it is you're mapping your groove onto your drum pattern, and it's kind of changing it, right? And it's doing that, the way it's doing it is actually by using the warp markers, right? So even though we did it manually before where we were moving shit around, what's happening is it's mapping these drums with the swing style using the warp markers. So that's why you're hearing the change. Now, if you like it and you're like, that sounds way better than the beat I made and I want to keep it and commit to it, instead of having it operate in real time, what you can do is there's a little commit groove button over here. It's a little arrow above. If you click on that, watch what happens to the warp markers over here. All right, 1, 2, 3. You see how they moved? Like I said, it uses the warp markers to create those swing patterns. Right? Interesting stuff. And again, you can do it with anything. Let's see if we can make these vocals interesting. I don't know if this will actually work. It depends on the pattern, right? Yeah, it's not going to work with vocals. Right? You can get real. I just fucking love Ableton. I'm gonna say this like a trillion times, but if you want a platform where you can be fully creative, Ableton is the shit, man. I love it. I love it. All right, so that is how you do groove pools, right? And you have a ton of selections here to choose from, so I'll let you guys definitely have fun with that. Now, I do also want to say that these grooves can be applied onto MIDI tracks too. So for example, if we had a MIDI track here, and we said, you know what? I don't want to use these drums. I just want to use my own. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a drum sound on this. Let's do our regular 808, whatever. All right, let's record something. Okay, I totally fucked that up. All right, let's just use that for now. Obviously, we need some hi-hats, so just record some hi-hats. All right, let's do this. Shut the fuck up. Yeah. All right. So same thing. If you are on your clip, your MIDI clip, over here you have the groove thing. Right? Changes the beat to a more swing. Remember, originally it was just this. Okay, yeah. So good question, Kelvin. So when you're recording in the session view, remember you can record clips directly onto these clip slots. You don't have to just record here in the arrangement view. When you're in the arrangement view, you have to have the overdub, the MIDI overdub engaged, right? This thing right here, if you want to overdub. But over here, all you need to do is hit this button over here. You see this? This is the session record button. By the way, it's always, I guess over here for you guys, there's a help bar in the bottom left, but this essentially is what allows you to overdub. Which is why I didn't have to. That's a great question. Good catch, man. All right. So you see that the original beat that I made was and then with the groove, right? And again, if you want to commit, you just hit the little arrow, and obviously there's no warp markers here. Why? Because it is MIDI. If you want to change MIDI, all you need to do is move the notes around. So if I click on this arrow, these notes are going to move in 1, 2, 3. Boom. See that? Before, after. Before, after. Before, after. Before, after. Right? So there you go. So you can apply this with your own beats. You can apply this on samples. You can do this whole groove thing any way you like. Cool. All right. Well, that's actually all the warping stuff that I wanted to talk about. So I might as well get into the next topic, which is synthesizers. Now, you guys already, I don't even want to like fill your heads too much with shit, because you already use synthesizers all the time. A synthesizer is just a device that allows you to generate sounds, right? It creates interesting sounds. The 808s that you use, the pads that you use, the synths, they're all synthesizers, right? So you guys are in a generation where synthesizers are like the norm. It's like obviously you use them all the time, maybe without even knowing that you're using a synthesizer, but you are. But I do want to give you the breakdown of what a synthesizer is made up of, and how you can take something as simple as a sine wave and create interesting sounds with it. So let's go ahead, and you know what I'm going to do, because this is all kind of clustered up here, I'm going to make a new session, right? And we're going to call this synths. All right. So I believe there might be an assignment for synthesizer too. I think that's more to do with your project, but you guys are going to be pretty okay with that. So I'm going to get a MIDI track loaded up, and then I'm going to go to my instruments. And up here, there's a little instrument called analog. If you're working on the full version of Ableton, you should have it. If not, you can load up any synthesizer you want that actually has access to basic sine waves and square waves. But here you go. This is the analog plugin down here. And it's actually a pretty basic synthesizer, but it's perfect for me to explain what's going on in a synthesizer setup. So a synthesizer is essentially made up of various components. The three primary components are the oscillator, the filter, and the amplifier, right? And you can see that right here, actually. You see OSC1, FIL1, AMP1, right? And there's a second one at the bottom, but we're just going to use one for now, right? This is actually a combination of two setups. There's also an LFO component to a synthesizer, which allows you to get really interesting textures and percussive sounds. But we're going to start with the basics. The oscillator is essentially the part of the synthesizer that generates the actual sound. So if you had a traditional synthesizer, the oscillator is the part that would generate the sine wave sound, right? A sine wave is just movement pushed through the air. You guys already know what sound is. We already talked about it a trillion times. So that's the oscillator part of it. This is where you can actually choose the shape of the original sound. So right here under shape, you have a sawtooth, you have a sine wave, sawtooth, square, and random, right? So you can choose the actual origin of your sound. So for example, if I do sine wave, it sounds like this, right? If I do sawtooth, it sounds like this. If I do square, it sounds like this. So slightly different. Right? It's weird playing on a computer keyboard. And then random is just noise. Right? So, there you go. Let's start with square wave. I kind of like the square. Right? A couple of things that are present in an oscillator section are obviously your gain. Then you have the option for sending the sound to either filter 1, filter 2, or a mix blend between the two, right? You can do 50-50 if you want to. Now, again, I'm only focusing on one component at a time and one section at a time, so I'm just going to send the entire sound to filter 1. Another component of your oscillator is your pitch shift, right? So you have octave. You have semitone. And then you have detune, which is smaller increments. So it's like cents. I think we talked about this, but there's 100 cents per semitone. Or per tone, I think. All right, so that's your oscillator section. It's essentially the part of the synthesizer that generates the original sound, right? So in this case, we have a couple of options, but they're all fundamental sound shapes. Sine wave, sawtooth, square wave, random, right? Next, that gets fed into a filter. A filter is essentially your EQ section, right? So the EQ section can be a low pass filter, a band pass, notch, high pass, or formant, right? So the formant has more to do with like the actual shape if you were thinking about like vowels and the shape of your throat. But the most common thing that everybody uses is a low pass filter, right? So a low pass filter, you guys already know what that is. If you don't, remember, if you had an EQ, a low pass is this guy, right? This guy right here. So if you're using a low pass, this is what happens. Right? You have a cutoff point, which is where the number is, and then the frequencies start to dip off. Well, that's essentially what this knob is over here. Right? Now, there's a couple of things to the cutoff. One is the actual frequency where the cutoff starts, but then there's this concept called resonance or reso. What that means is you're going to boost at the point of cutoff. So this would be an example of a resonance, right? So that all factors into your filter in the synthesizer. So check this out. Right now the cutoff is at 600, right? You can see that it starts to dip. And then if you increase the reso, you get some interesting overtones too, right? Woo! Okay, this is like hardcore, like we're touching on the introductions to hardcore sound design. You know, when you think about, especially when you think about like film and video games. But that's essentially your filter section. Your filter section is your EQ section to shape the tone of your sound. And finally, every sound needs some sort of amplification, either through a speaker or, yeah, it sounds like feedback, kind of, right? But it's interesting feedback because it's like it's got overtones to it as well, which is kind of interesting. In order to hear any sound, you need to put it through a speaker or amplifier. I guess, yeah. This is also where you can pan left and right. So level and pan is in your amplifier section. So pan, you guys know that. And level. All right. Now, as, yeah, we still got some time. So I'm just going to touch on LFOs. So check this out. An LFO is a component of a synthesizer. First of all, it's right up here, and you have to engage it by clicking on the LFO button. But it's essentially the part of the synthesizer that generates a low frequency sound. So LFO actually stands for low frequency oscillator. And remember, we already said that an oscillator is a component that generates sound. So an LFO is a low frequency oscillator or a low frequency sound generator. But we don't actually use the LFO to hear the sound. We use it to map parameters onto the movement of the sound. I know that sounds super complicated, but it really isn't. So if you think about a sine wave, right? So check this out. In the LFO section, you see this blue sine wave over here, right? That's the shape that I've chosen. I can change how fast the sine wave goes up and down by changing what's called the rate. So as I pull it down, it gets wider and wider. As I increase it, it gets faster and faster. So you're like, okay, if we're not using to listen to it, then what the fuck are we using this sine wave for? Like I said, I can actually map this sine wave movement onto a knob in the oscillator or filter section. So you might have noticed me doing this. Right? So I'm doing that manually right now. But if I say go to my LFO section, right? Make sure that it's set up to a sine wave. Make sure that the rate is something that I like. Then go back to my filter section. You'll see that at the bottom, there's a bunch of different things happening here. And I'm going to go through some of them because there's a lot that's going on right now. But one of them is under frequency mod, it says LFO1. So this basically says, how much do you want the LFO1 to affect the frequency mod? Remember, this is the frequency mod right here. So check this out. I'm going to increase this up to its maximum, which is 4. And that means the frequency is now going to go up, down, up, down. So it's going all the way from 0 to whatever the cutoff is. If I reduce the LFO amount, then it's not as extreme. It won't go super high or super low. Check it out. So the wave is smaller. And then if I go back to my LFO, I can change the rate of the sine wave, like how fast it goes up and down. Right? Now, the cooler thing about this is that instead of having the rate be set to like a frequency, you can set it to quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, whatever. So that means it'll map onto the tempo of the project. So check this out. Wait. Right? So it's kind of like you can get this really interesting variation of the sound. Damn, wish you were here. Yo, I keep thinking about Kelvin's fucking, was it improv song that we did on the first day at the studio? Man, I'll never forget that. Probably the most fun I've had. I loved it. So there you go. That's what LFOs are used for. They're used to map these kind of movements onto knobs. So you can also do something more interesting, like let's say we'll do, instead of a sine wave, let's do a rectangle wave, right? Which is like your square wave. And maybe we will map this, instead of mapping it onto frequency, let's map it onto the level. So right here, level mod, LFO1. Now, all right. Ooh. I wonder what that chord is. Anybody music theory? No? All right. So you see, you can get really, really cool stutter effects with this too. And if you go into like automation, you can change them in real time. It's even more fun if you map it onto a button. So you guys already remember, but if you go to MIDI, click on rates, press this, right? So I'm changing this knob over here. Yeah, it gets really fun, right? I fucking love Ableton. And remember, this is just a synthesizer. It's like a instrument plugin, so you can record it just like MIDI. Right, so... and it just gets recorded. Remember, I only played one note. There you go. That's it. Now, you don't even have to play at the same time. Now, here's the thing. Because I have a smooth knob, it's a little more difficult to get precise. But if you have the hard click knobs, then yeah, you can get like very, very defined things. Or if you just automate it, if you just draw it in and automate it, you can get those values. What's another thing that you guys do? So if you do the pan and map it to the LFO, right over here, pan mod, map this to the LFO, make the LFO like a sawtooth, do something like this. Woo! If you got headphones on and speakers, you know what I'm going through right now. Right? And also with these triangles and was it square? You can adjust the width too. Right? Even the square one right here. Oh, sorry. Right? So the LFO is like almost like a level of automation where it moves the parameters without you having to move them. Right? It basically does that whole up down thing by mapping those parameters onto these kinds of waveforms. Yeah, you can do it with pitch as well. So if you go to the first one, there's a pitch mod, right? Right? Oh, by the way, something really cool that you can do with pitch mod is when you have an oscillator set up like this, basic, you can actually have the pitch envelope modified. So this is just a straight line saying that when you press a note, it plays one pitch. It starts at one pitch, it ends at the same pitch for the entire duration, right? But if you move this up and down, you'll see that the start note is lower, and then the sustain note is where it stays, where it ends up. So it starts low, goes to the sustain value, and sustains it. So remember that term sustain. Right? So it has like a pew kind of effect. So this is essentially an envelope, a pitch envelope. And I want you guys to remember that term envelope because we're going to talk about it more on another day. But a pitch envelope allows you to shape how a pitch is delivered. Yeah, that's basically it. You can even think of it as, somebody explained it to me this way. Imagine you take the pitch and put it in an envelope. It kind of encompasses the whole pitch, and it tells the pitch, where it needs to go or how it should act. The envelope determines how the parameter will be embodied, if you will. That's some philosophical shit right there. Oh my god. You guys seen Scary Movie? You guys remember that scene where was it like nah, don't watch that tape, man. Shanice from down the street, she watched it and then she woke up dead. It's like, how can you wake up dead, man? Because you're alive when you go to sleep, man. So you can be dead and be in a bed, but you can die and not be in a bed, still be dead. It's like, oh shit, that's some next level shit. That's some quantum shit. We were just talking about Kevin Hart, so that just came to me right now. All right, let's let's get off of fucking YouTube right now. I'll see you back on Zoom. All right.